我想先谈一下，就是Joseph 跟我的姻缘真的是非常的，我们两个的姻缘应该是非常的深刻哈，是在18年前，也跟捷运局有关哈，就是委托那时候我在北美馆哈，负责中正纪念堂站的公共艺术的规划啊，而18年后，终于 Joseph Kosuth 的第一件公共艺术作品哈，而且也是台湾第一件公共艺术作品是观念艺术，同时是真的用文字文本呈现的作品能够呈现哈。所以今天坐在这，我其实感觉非常的激动，因为能够邀请到 Joseph 这样的一个当代的艺术家，而我们用的是一个接近文艺复兴时期的一个完成作品的一种时间感，用一个18年的时间完成了一个当初的想象的作品，而最后还是能够落实哈。虽然是在不同的地点，但同样都是在车站哈。从中正纪念堂的这个捷运站移到了西区，就是将来的国家门户意向的这个桃捷线的台北车站哈。所以我真的觉得这个是一个很有意义的事情，就是一个非常当代艺术的作品，但是我们能够用一种时间来带来的一种时间的一个重量感哈。那有关 Joseph 的重要性，我想大概没有办法用很短的时间来介绍哈。那我们都知道他是60年代是以观念艺术以及装置艺术的一个先驱者哈。在同辈的艺术家里面，他们的提出的一个很重要的一个关怀，就是艺术家的角色成为意义的提供者意义的生产者producer of meaning 意义的生产者，也就是说，艺术家开始思考不是我们如何创作艺术，而是我们为什么要创作艺术就是从 how we make art 到 why we make art 那这些观念、这些东西都是在跟 Joseph 同辈的这些艺术家一起去激发出来的那我觉得在台湾我们也很难得能够有这样子的，在现代到当代的艺术史的教科书里面，一定会出现的艺术家能够亲临现场，而且他事实上，即使是他们这么资深，我跟各位分享一下他到昨天晚上都还在修改他的版本。那为什么我会担任他的那个 slide 播放呢？就是他事实上做了一个非常复杂的一个 format 因为大家知道，常常大家都觉得说，好像 Joseph 这样子的一个观念艺术家，使用别人的文本，然后来做创作但事实上，这整个视觉的掌握，从一个今天等一下我们要看到的演讲，其实就可以感受到一二那因为他做了非常完整的准备，而且是从他最早的作品一直谈到我们这次的在台北完成的这个纷纷从田里飞起这件作品所以我就不多耽误他的时间，把时间交给Joseph，让我们热烈的掌声欢迎他
So I'd like to have some understanding of my audience. And so to do this, I always begin when I'm speaking in a country where the first language is not English. I tell a joke, a short joke. So I ask the translator not to translate. Okay? It's the story, I had a show many years ago in Hamburg, Germany. And there was a party in my honor after. The mayor, the burgomaster, Hamburg was there, his wife, various other people. And I was hiding in the corner of a room. And a man walked in with kind of an afro of a white guy. And and he came over and said, "Are you the artist?" And I said, "Yes." He said, I heard you collect jokes, and I thought you would like to have the joke of my uncle, Albert Einstein. It was his favorite joke." And I said, "Absolutely." So this is the joke. It's a conversation between man and God. And man said to God, "Well, listen, God, for you, what is 100 million years?" And God said, "Oh, for me, it's only a minute." And man said, "Wow." So, well, listen, God, for you, what is $100 billion? for me is only a penny. So the man said, well, listen, God, can I have that penny? And God said, sure, just a minute. All right, well, not a big success. So now I know.
So that you have to speak slowly.
The rest, and
now you know you have to speak slow so that the interpreter.
That was my slow speaking.
Yeah, I know, but it's really funny. It's funny. Okay.
So, public text, Dublin text. Part 1. After nearly 40 years of a kind of informal division of my work, or in my work, between temporary outdoor projects and works and installations in museums and galleries of a more permanent nature, I have found a particular pleasure in doing permanent public work. Working directly with a public space framed with other meanings than those associated with the specialized institutional ones within art presents a new challenge of a particular kind. The special task in doing such work is to make certain that it is appropriate to the context. How we define appropriate describes the interface between the viewer-reader and the artist as a producer of meaning. This is in terms of both the focus of the work as a project with a subject area, as well as the social and cultural context of the community that receives it and must live with it. An important consideration, one which has made a special challenge, is that such work must be accessible to a non-specialized audience, while at the same time providing an enriching cultural contribution as it makes a serious addition to the body of my work. The assignment is a different one from working in a museum, for example, which can presume a certain knowing audience. There's a kind of social contract to working in a space shared by many, and the artist has some responsibility to provide a level of attainable meaning. The task is to do that and not compromise one's problematic as an artist. However, long before I began doing public works with this objective, I found the public site an important one to locate my work. The second investigation, 1968-69, was partially my own critical response to earlier work of mine utilizing photographs. In both the proto-investigations from 1965 with works such as 1 and 3 Chairs, and the first investigation begun in 1966, which was made of photographs, negative enlargement of text, such as dictionary definitions and etymological entries, which were, as a form of presentation, intended to be made and remade as a device to eradicate the aura and reliquary of painting, so other questions could be raised about the nature of art and language. As a result, photography eventually emerged within what later was perceived as a kind of avant-garde practice, and led me to abandon its use in 1968 for the next several years, and to begin the second investigation and its use of anonymous public media. We're finished with this. Okay. While a kind of fine art of photography had existed for some time parallel to the activity of painting, it had all of the problems of painting. It was old conservative, with the popular appeal of realism, and new conservative, media-defined along with the best of modernism. In 1968, the arrival of the work of colleagues of mine, eventually to be associated with conceptual art, as well as the need of earthwork artists to have a gallery presence, meant that photography was increasingly being seen as part of a kind of avant-garde practice in ways which it had not since Man Ray and other dadaist earlier in the century. Thus, while this was a time when others were then beginning to use photography in their work, I came to the conclusion that photography was beginning to share many of the limitations of painting, defined formally and technically, be they the perception of either limits or innovation, and an a priori establishing its meaning as art through the authority of such form. It seemed to me that all media-defined art activity were beginning to share this characteristic. For me, the nature of art had become the questioning of the nature of art. Yet forms of authority clearly stop the questioning process. And in keeping with how Clement Greenberg defined modernism at the time, the modernist institutional view of art was that it was comprised of a Kantian quest to find the limits of the medium. For me, however, the question was a larger one. How does art produce meaning, first about itself, and then as itself in the world? To find this out, I felt I had to ask, how does art generate meaning as art outside of such a formally authoritative context? It was as a work in the world that we can not only understand how art produces its own meaning, but also how culture itself is produced. I turned to the use of public media as a presentation device for several reasons. It severed the event of the work from the kind of physical form of art which one associated with the high style of modernism. Since one didn't expect to find art and a space reserved for advertising, such as billboards or newspaper ads, it wasn't defined as art a priori, as painting, sculpture, or photography is. It made completely clear that a formless approach to the work would be absurd. In this way, it could not appeal to certain inherent forms for its validation as art. Yet, in spite of this, it still was art. What could this then tell us? Was that there was more to the activity of art than, say, the manipulation of forms and colors. It enabled me to separate the activity of art from this conventional understanding of what art could be. In this way, the work was able to ask questions within the practice itself, which a more traditional form of art could not. There was a political content to this process as well. My generation had real questions to ask of institutional forms of authority of any kind in 1968. Painting seemed insular and elitist. Using the organs of mass culture without pandering to the masses, a la Walt Disney or product advertising, had a distinct appeal to me. It reflected the particular interests of my political activism at the time. The second investigation was my response to this situation. While I felt such works as One Two Chairs had initiated such a questioning process, it was increasingly limited by this new reading being given to work using photography. The second investigation work used as its form of presentation anonymous advertisements in public media, such as newspapers, magazines, billboard handbills, as well as even television advertising. This is understood to be the first known use of such a context for the production of artwork, and it should be seen as something specific and quite different from the billboard art which followed in the next decade, where this presentational strategy was often used as an end in itself. The content of the advertisement I utilized in 1968 were based on a taxonomy of the world developed by Roget as the synopsis of categories for use in his thesaurus. Each ad was an essay from the synopsis, entry from the synopsis, which in effect put into the world a fragment of its own description. What this initiated, of course, was a questioning of the ontology of artworks, the role of context, of language, of institutional framing, of reception. For me, the concerns of this work focused clearly on what was to remain a central concern of my art. It was apparent to me by the mid-1960s that the issue for new work was not around materialization or dematerialization of the work. In fact, it was not even concerned with materials. The issue which defined my work, as well as that activity which became known as conceptual art, was the issue of signification. What are the questions pertaining to the function of meaning in the production and reception of works of art? What is the application and what is the limit of language as a model in both the theory and the production of actual work? Then following from that, what is the role of context, be it architectural, psychological, or institutional, on the social, cultural, and political reading of the work? It was these issues that separated conceptual art from the modernist agenda which preceded it. And it is this non-prescriptive practice which has remained flexible enough to endure and, quite obviously, continues to provide a basis for conceptual art's relevance to more recent art practice. Indeed, what is interesting is that when I started my activity, it had to have a special name, conceptual art. But the work of younger artists now, fortunately, can just be called art. The seventh investigation, 1970, employed a banner over the street in Turin, Italy. Let's go. There we go, the banner. It was a psychologist's working model of the concept of abstract. You may find this photograph familiar because it was on the back cover of Germain Chalon's first museum exhibition titled Conceptual Art, Arte Povera, Land Art in Torino. These slides are from the same series and are all the same text. Show some more. Okay. This was a billboard. The work had 4 parts, and this is the bill. Go back to this. This is in Chinatown, New York, and then it was also in the very important early show at MoMA in New York called Information. Do we have those photos or not? Yeah, there we are. Okay. There's other works of mine which are in the collection of Museum of Modern Art, but I stuck that in without permission at the time.
Good.
Next. And there was this was the 4th part, which was a very funny newspaper, which was the newspaper of the American Communist Party, which was, of course, mostly paid by the CIA anyway. But so I thought it was an interesting newspaper to use. At present, my approach to public art aspires to integrate several aspects that are important to the location. They attempt to provide a monumental view of the experience of members of a particular community to their own historical presence, and manage to do so without the normal sentimental and institutionalized aspects of city monuments. As a work of art, its context becomes the content. Again, it's the architectural, the social, the psychological, and the cultural, as well as the historical terrain which binds them. With this objective in mind, such work utilizes both the historical cultural aspect of its location and its role in contemporary life. In such projects as mine, the experience of the work becomes one and the same as the architectural environment in which the work is seen, humanizing what is often experienced by individuals as depersonalized public buildings. It is for this reason that such an art project must be seen as integrated, both in conception and in fabrication, as part of the whole urban experience, and not be treated as a separate additional object which was added afterwards, as more traditional public artworks often is. The buildings of any community are the repository of the life which has taken place there and its accumulated meanings. This is finally what history consists of. But you ask, what are these works which I have built, and why? In fact, how is it even your work, since the words are the words of others? I would answer like this. As artists, we all begin to construct with what is given. We appropriate fragments of meaning from the detritus of culture and construct other meanings, which are our own. In the same sense, all writers write with words invented by others. One uses words with prior meaning to make paragraphs which have a meaning of one's own. It was clear by the mid-60s that the existing institutionalized form of art, the paradigm of painting and sculpture, could no longer itself constitute being a paragraph of one's own. It had for artists become a design and signage of the idiospace of modernism, an over-enriched context of historicized meaning signifying itself and collapsing new meaning under its own weight. By reducing any ingredient of cultural prior meaning to being a smaller constructive element, a word element, I could then construct other meanings at another level, producing a paragraph of my own, and still remain within the context of art sufficiently, I felt, to change it. This has been a basic aspect of my practice and has, for over 40 years, necessitated some form of appropriation, and is evidenced through my work beginning with One of the Three Chairs, 1965, through to the play The Unmentionable at the Brooklyn Museum. Should be further ahead there.
Yes.
Brooklyn.
Yes, but
There we go. And now, and as well now, with my present project, One Field to the Next, here in Taiwan. Others have asked, is work such as yours visual, and are you concerned with whether it is beautiful? And I confess, I cannot distinguish between visual and conceptual when the knowledge of a work's elements and its internal play is acquired visually. A concept must be communicated to be known. In fact, eliminate the legacy of formalism and the question becomes nonsense. The reading of the text and understanding the play between them and the architecture is all visual. In any case, I certainly accept as a potential given all of the meanings and experiences which the work generates, including both beautiful or ugly. However, I think to understand the work in terms of it having a history and a context is to comprehend the very limited role traditional aesthetic perception has to this work's deeper meanings. In other words, the extent of the role of traditional aesthetics in the play of the work is provided by the viewer-reader, providing that by them probably risks blocking their appreciation of the work. One can, however, more easily control the desire to theorize about those responses. I think of the comment by Roland Barthes, quote, "A text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, but a multidimensional space in which a variety of writing, none of them original, blend and clash. The text is a tissue of quotation drawn from the innumerable centuries of culture." Century, plural. To make a work which plays with history is, of course, to acknowledge that such a work is a play on the postponement of meaning. It is a play of delay. All you can see of my contribution is a view of the artistic process itself. For when meaning is the material of one's work, it remains a gap, something between the lines. It is, however, through that gap that art sees the world and then begins to change it. Part 2. Zero and nine. In the 1980s, I dedicated my practice to the cultural exegesis of Sigmund Freud's work. The images on the screen show examples of this production, in particular a series of mine titled Zero and Not. Here we have a cluster of contingencies, a text which represents an order of arbitrary form which makes a systemic sense, believable while they teach belief. The words are meaningful contingently in relation to the sentence, and the sentence to the paragraph. The paragraph from The Psychopathology of Everyday Life by Sigmund Freud is meaningful in relation to the exposition of Freud's work. The use of Freud's work in this context is contingent on understanding how I use zero and not as a kind of conceptual architecture, a ready-made order that, while anchored to the world, provides as a theoretical object a dynamic system. This text, though, is also just a device, a surface, a skin. There is another syntax, also anchored to the world, which is the architecture of rooms, which also orders this work. While the order remains there, the gaps and omissions, the entrances, exits, views in and out, that which puts the work in the world. Rather than disrupt the order, clarify and qualify the room, the world, and art, that which is not, but within this order is. The cluster of arbitrary order has also a made order, which unifies it. Beyond the unification given to it by the architecture of the room itself, It begins with a counting off of the paragraphs, repeated until the walls are full. And that cancellation, which constructs as it erases, suggests one thing, a field of language itself, present while removed. Not just absence presented, it is language reduced to words, making the texture of reading itself an arrival at language, an arrival which constructs other orders, ones which blind as they make themselves visible. The numbers separate the paragraphs as they unify the work. This provides the field in which the color coding systemically underscores repeatedly the fragments that make up the unitary paragraphs, a made-up order which constructs or deconstructs the paragraph differently than the other order of the world, which makes the paragraph with the sentence. Differently, too, than that order which made rooms out of windows, doors, changing ceilings, and those walls which presume the lives which will be lived within them.
Next section.
One of these groups of photos, I don't know the order because I was reading, but it was the private apartment of Sigmund Freud, where he lived, some of you may know, with his sister-in-law. And when they received this apartment, they were able to buy it. I was invited to do this installation. It was the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the death of Freud. And it was the last work I did on Freud. I said to myself, you finally made it into Freud's bedroom. If you don't stop now, you'll never stop. There we were. Architecture provides the possibility of a metatext. The integrity of the perceived whole of a room, a building, a facade anchors the separate and fragment text into a systematic whole, unit. With introduction, contradiction, try it again. With contradiction, simply one form of articulation of that whole. In this way, the work is working on language, but in terms of the interrelationship of those various perceptions of a whole, since each individual fragment is itself a whole. In this sense, my use of images and or text functions with the same weight within each work as a play of language. And the use of borrowed images is as much a work on or with language as are the stolen text. The architecture provides the confines of the play at the same time as it locates the work and its meaning in the world. Architecture, a space formed by a social use, describes as it prescribes a social meaning to the ceilings, walls, doors, windows, and the floors, and the psychological impact it constructs along with that use. In this way, the role of architecture as part of the play enacts as it represents the world. The position of the viewer-reader, located as they are at a remove by being within the social and psychological constructed area of architecture, spanning the world, are permitted a view of the total play of text, the metatext of the work itself. Installations, as a structure or constructive element, can be seen to often be conceived by the artist as a kind of stage set, an autonomous one, built to generate the play which follows from it. The play itself, a connected and disruptive narrative and discourse of historical and cultural references, makes formal associations with both art and non-art sources, and contains both social and political meaning within a cultural view, along with the psychological and other associated responses to an architectural setting already internalized as part of the installation. The play, along with the viewer, and it consists of the approach itself towards the viewer that the viewer finds there. The dialogue, as initiated, is provided by this discourse, and it begins as an interior one. The theater of which I speak is one anchored in the world, and as an installation, it has been a liberating platform for practicing artists who established it as their own postmodern zone of play. The actors in this play are without a script, and the viewing audience and the actors are, in fact, one and the same. Neither the fictive nor the properly theatrical are to be found in the program of this artistic enterprise. There's no need for absorption nor a passage to transcendence. There's only a construction within a cultural discourse at a moment of our own history. One having a language that needs to be seen as an interface where meaning in this world is in the process of construction. It is a meaning which shows, constructed in a way which is specific to art, and its assertions are no less significant, philosophically or culturally, for being manifested and implicit. Installations arrived as a result of the need of artists to produce works which were in the world, were employing objects, whether employing objects or not, but which were framed by the limits, but which were not framed by the limits imposed by the fictive space requirements of modern sculpture and painting. Thus, in an important way, installations were also free of the ideological baggage of modernism, particularly given the consequences of the hijacking of late modernism by Greenberg, Fried, and their followers. The third contribution was seen at the time as more than just an intellectual event in academia, where it has since been consigned, remains a curiosity for my generation. One can now see that the contribution then was primarily negative, because there emerged no art of any significance which was generated by or had the support and positive influence of this theory. Its role was primarily one of a negative framing and misreading of work, such as pop art and minimalism, which in fact has since proven to be both significant and consequential. If by reactionary one means a response intended to maintain the status quo, this certainly defines the efforts of Greenberg, Fried et al. It was the theoretical shoring up of a form of art that was already beginning to lose its relevance. That was certainly obvious to many of us then, and it is simply a fact now, some 40-some years later. The lesson here is about the power of art to define its own self-conception within the practice itself, as it participates in shaping the culture of its time. What is also revealed is the limited value and effect of any theory without the anchor of an actual artistic practice supporting it. The system of belief which accompanies and shapes the view of an object intended as art is not simply an object, but as a construction was for me exactly where the rupture needed to take place. It was the location where practice concerned with why found itself in a mission that felt at the time like historical necessity. And it should be said that even if still modernist in many ways at the time, minimalism nonetheless was important for making a break which showed the way out of that swamp of meaning which sculpture and painting increasingly represented. This was long before the market turned minimal art back into sculpture for its own purpose. The view from the balcony now is a view which includes both modernism and postmodernism. And the terrain we see has been built over the past 30 or 40 years, resulting in another culture with other expectations and a different mission. If John showed us how a canvas wasn't a window into another space, installations constitute a leap and a break. They are already in the world we inhabit, and the effect they have is meant to happen there. The questions our work became free to ask are a result of us as artists finding ourselves there. The work which this has initiated in the past decades has shown that playing field to be a fertile one, as has the theory also initiated by institutional critique, which in its various forms has benefited most significantly. It is actual works upon which art theory must be anchored, and without the discourse begun by conceptual art's earliest works, such a conversation could not be taking place. Next. It is no accident that my first major show at Leo Castelli Gallery in 1971 after my previous smaller one there of the second investigation in '69, was the 8th investigation, now in the Ponza collection, comprised of a large table, 12 chairs, 24 wall clocks, 12 notebooks filled with appropriated text taken from various authors on function, tautology, and time. The viewer-reader, as I called the audience for this work at the time, was expected to sit down and read and to make the connections within a field of contingency and meaning that the order of the clocks facilitated. Whatever absorption this work required was in the reading of the text, and the fictive space requirements of convention and modernity died right there. On the wall and in the notebooks was a chart, mode d'emploi, instructions, which ended with my declaration of the work as postmodern. This was in 1971, and it was on the same wall in the same room that Jasper John's first flag painting was shown some years before. Even without any intention to self-historicize, one might still pause to say that there is a history and a mission to the practice of which I speak, and it's important to know it, to fully understand that aspect of postmodernism which installation work constitutes, and which emerged in the following decade. The material of installation is first a psychological and social experience provided by the room's architecture. This results from the meaning of the social and cultural history of its use, along with the combined experience of the psychology of that particular architectural context added to the prior architectural experience. We know and experience that while we also know we are standing in the world, we also know in a museum or gallery that, like anything else, its being there can be of limited duration, but we suspend that understanding. The world as that location, that institutional place of cultural activity, will change and continue in another way. This location in time provides contemporary installations that texture of history, which is part of one's more immediate experience of them. There are other aspects to permanent installations which make them valuable in another way, but to understand both better, we better begin with the temporary. The point is that installation work, even a temporary one, insofar as the experience of the work goes, is attached to a location. It is fixed as part of the architecture and seals its fate along with the history and culture of that one location in the world. The implication being quite unlike the free-floating object that transcends any particular place, finding its aura in the market on its way to the final resting place of the heavenly museum. It is the loss of the sense of self of absorption which removes the viewer from the here and now and makes the experience of a fictive space even possible. Why installations are so intrinsically linked with this understanding of postmodernism is that their commitment to a location links them to the here and now, and is yet discursively part of what makes them art. And as such, as art, they can do so while they remain in the world. Sorry. One cannot hope to prescribe work having an engagement with questions concerning the production of meaning to always turn out the results that are either well designed or aesthetically pleasing along the lines of long-received criteria of attraction and market desirability. Nor, with any more or less likelihood, should we expect a rigorous and prescriptive form of visible uncanniness of demonstrating an uglier non-art gravitas to be part of the experience either. Such an insistence ultimately functions as a form of style. How one makes a work must be in the service of why it is being made. To that end, a work can look like anything at all, including not necessarily being visible at all. Beyond the signifying needs inherent in how the work must manifest itself and what is required for it to construct the meaning that it does, how it looks really doesn't matter beyond its role in that requirement. We do know that historically new art, when it is making a contribution to the history of ideas, often doesn't look like art. Driven primarily by artistic intention, such work, if judgment is the issue, must be judged by its own standards, those standards required for the work's reception, which permit it to be put into play culturally. The viewer and reader must be armed, apparently, with the admonition that seeing isn't as simple as looking. This postmodern project, however, out of the process of an ethnological, like formative historical path of growth within culture, has internalized the carried over feature of modernism. This can be seen to be that art requires a self-definition, even if a continually transformatory one, to be put in play in the service of maintaining the recognition of the self, that of having a quality of transitory autonomy. This feature is a necessary one for art to be readable and meaningful in a given cultural and historical moment. This is the operative play of art, and is part of the nature of the dynamic of its own inherent cultural force to self-describe itself in relation to the world in which it finds itself, even if always in a way which is subject to revision by the practitioners of culture themselves, who must embrace it. It is this internal drive of art towards implicit autonomy that provides its traction with the world. Art's ultimate refusal to participate with the world as a knowing partner within the context of other meaning, corporate, religious, entertainment, whatever, is how it preserves and maintains its own particular, even if non-prescriptive character. Viralite, was Felix Gonzalez Torres put it so eloquently. His paradoxical dialectic requires that it must take on the forms and meanings of the world of the living, and borrowing freely as part of a dynamic and interior order, which protects its identity as something other than the world in order to make meaning for the living in the world. That which distinguishes the actual production of art from that of paintings by monkeys or the drawings of children is that intentional act of manifesting a specific kind of meaning, art, within human cultural and social meaning, one which necessitates an individual's intention of taking subjective responsibility for that act, and without which such an activity would have no political life. Without such a profile of autonomy, art could never see itself, that is, it would lose its self-reflexivity, and thus its capacity as a critical and political force within culture. Or, as Gaston Bachelard put it, as soon as art has become autonomous, it makes a fresh start. In this way, art manifests itself as a continual and dialectical new beginning. As part of its own autonomous spiral, it must be able to see itself, which also means to see the world in itself as it proceeds. The self-reflexive moment constitutes in culture the basis for its political life, as a critical space and a transformatory moment within its role as part of the production of consciousness itself. As it does so, human intention takes on a role as a producer of meaning, along with the subjective responsibility for having done so, and thereby anchors the cultural discourse of which it is a part to the historical moment in which it happens. It is this which gives art its authenticity, both in the present and for future generations. Part 3, the last part. I will include in this slide presentation photographs of some of my permanent public works, but not all at once, since some are parts of other series. This work, Ex Libris Champignon Fija, continued my use of ready-made text, which began in the 1960s. Since art begins with borrowed material, a condition usually masked by the naturalization of habit and the authority of tradition. Just as an author writes with words invented by others, yet still claims a personal expression and subjective responsibility to authorship, I also use words, sentences, and paragraphs, sometimes even books, and even whole libraries written by others. Meaning is produced within the context of this work. Ex Libris used quotes by writers and thinkers that represent a body of theory or literature that has made a significant contribution to present-day culture. The voice of these texts is authoritative. Their meanings are independent of my own intentions while they are simultaneously employed by me in production to generate my own meaning, which is context dependent. Anyway, this work on the screen was the result of a commission from Jacques Lang, at the time the Minister of Culture, to commemorate the 200th anniversary of Jean-François Champollion. For me, it was a work on meaning itself, more than simply celebrating a man. It was a simple but rich solution to the problem without the sentimentality or patriotic gloss that one associates with monuments. It is appropriate for its context virtually every way, historically, culturally, and socially. And the fact that it is also a staircase that links two parts of Figeac that had not been so easily passable previously made it more than a symbolic addition to the town. So, show a few slides here.
You want to talk about this project or just go?
No, just go through them until we get to the train station. I can't talk about every slide, or would be here longer than any of us want to be. Okay. This work makes use of a quote from Mondrian. It's in the train station in Eindhoven. It's in English. It's, "We can do one of two things: make a work of art or make an aesthetic object. Both are subject to the same laws, but the outcome is altogether different. Let us leave aside the question of whether art is still necessary. Our goal is the creation of a useful and aesthetic environment." That's what that says in Dutch. One aspect of my original reason to use neon in 1965 was that it was already part of popular culture as signage and didn't have high art association. It also was clearly a temporary form of public writing. Since neon only functions for a certain time and is then repumped or remade, I was taking a popular form of communication, but instead of announcing a product, I was using that voice to say something else. In Venice, at the Palazzo Panieri Stampaglia, 1997, I did a work called The Material of Ornament, which was part of the Sarajevo 2000 exhibition at the Venice Biennale. The source for this work was a text by John Ruskin, dated from the middle of the 19th century. Ruskin's goal was to list the elements that constituted architectural ornamentation in Venice. In my work, I was also curious to see if I could stand some of my own presumptions on their head and do a work about decoration and ornamentation, fairly taboo for myself, which nonetheless, at the same time, was a reflective state of its own decorative role, even if in contradiction. I was interested in the idea of taking a theoretical model of ornamentation and using that as ornamentation. For me, this work functions as a structure with a reference to tautological models, an interest of mine nearly 30 years ago, but without the meaninglessness one associates with tautology. It stays within the circuitry of art, but it's an art that is in the world and its history. Indeed, the act of putting into the play of art a theoretical text on decoration as decoration itself is not without irony, but irony is not the goal. What we would want to call irony, and can, is also the internal tension which collapses expectation and shows how art is the construction of meaning made visible. The architect is Hara. Miyagi is where the first Japanese dictionary was written and is on deposit in this library. It was based on the first American dictionary called Webster's. My work employs text from both of the first dictionaries. Keep going. This work is in the tallest building in Japan. The bottom of it is goes down to the lobby of the train station in Yokohama, and it's been estimated that 500,000 people a day see my work. That presumes they're looking, of course. Yeah. And more?
No?
Keep going.
Okay, the next project.
No, just keep going.
Okay. Well, maybe you want to say all these are your public art projects, just to remind the audience. Maybe you want to remind the audience that these are mainly your public art projects.
Yeah, this is a, well, I said that, yeah, but it's the public project. Yeah. That's where the German Deutschmark was printed for many years in Leipzig.
No, we're in Texas. In Amsterdam.
This is the University of Amsterdam.
And the freedom and the link. Okay. You want to just mention the title? Because it's on the screen, but anyway. These two slides, then we move on to the next one.
Thank you. Well, this is interesting because I was approached, this is the Kyoto train station. This is quite a well-known train station. Mr. Hara also was the architect there. And there were two groups arguing over what to do about artworks. There was a group of business association, and they wanted to do advertising in the train station. And then there were a group of art lovers, and they wanted to invite artists. So a committee was formed, and they came up with a great compromise. Invite artists to do advertisements. Truly. And I said, no, thank you. That's not what I do. So a couple of months later, I was approached again, and they said, well, we have an offer maybe would interest you. The only Zen Buddhist university in Japan would like you to do an advertisement for them. I said, okay, that I can do. And that's it. But I don't know if you can read it. Okay, we can roll up more.
Trying to explain what is in
You want to do that?
No.
Let me direct this there. Let me show the picture. This is a list of books that were destroyed when this library burned down in the late Middle Ages. And this is now a permanent work in the museum. So they couldn't do exhibitions anymore, so they built another building, which I thought was a very reasonable response.
Yeah. Okay, we have more slides on this.
Just even better.
Okay. Another project.
It's another very short while. So this is the Villa Medici. It was a very important cultural center during the Renaissance in Rome, and one of the major sons of the Medici family lived there. There was a lot of cultural activity took place, etc. But my texts refer to works. So the brother couldn't have children, so he was called back to Florence to make babies for the family, and he took his works with him because he had a lot of important works. These are the works that were removed, so these are the works that are absent. The show was, in fact, the installation was dedicated to my best friend in Rome who died, an artist named Gino de' Medici. Oh, that's strange. There's not.
That's the last page for the.
There should be some missing photos.
Okay. It's okay. So we move on to the next project.
Okay.
The Coca-Cola.
This this work. This is actually the Kunsthalle in Basel. The director, Peter Pakish, as the director of the museum, of course, museums have a program, and the program was to show young artists. Well, he wanted to show the 4 artists most influential to the younger artists. And so it was an exhibition in which Kabakov represented Moscow in 1960, something connecting to Moscow in 1968, John Baldessari to Los Angeles in 1968, I had New York in 1968, and Pistoletto had Torino in 1968. So my project, what I did was I took the date 1968 and I made a list of people who died in 68 and who were born in 68. So it ended up covering the whole century. Okay. Where are we? We went by Sapporo.
We finished with we'll move on to 11 minutes.
Okay, well, the order here is slightly different.
That's the order.
All right, keep going. This was a work that began at Castello, Sant'Angelo, in the Tiber, in the middle of Rome, and it was called Hadrian's Tomb previously, and it was the word meaning. There it was in 6 little rooms, and it was the words and the languages of the tourists who would go through there. And then I began to be invited, and I would take it to other countries, and I kept adding other languages. This was this is in Canary Islands.
It's a mix-up.
Okay. Yeah. This shows you the different locations where I've done the work. So this is a different work. There's a bridge in Torino, in the center of Torino, Italy, and on one side of the bridge was a quote from Italo Calvino, and the other side is a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, who died there. He lost his mind anyway. So this is keep going. I'll get back here. So for the World Cup in Sapporo in 2001, I was invited to do a work on these windows, which were about half a kilometer long. And it located Sapporo in relation to the world. So let's see, it was 15 meters by 500 meters. It was silkscreen on the glass curtain walls of the Astrodome. Both works located their specific orientation in relation to the rest of the world. The map of the world, consisting of signposts of cities and towns, became a global configuration by list, all the more so due to the arbitrary basis of its inclusive procedure. Okay. Next. So this is the Piazza Dante subway station. With a text by Dante. This was an enormous scandal in Naples. which of course pleased me very much. There were articles every day in the newspaper for almost 2 months about this work, about scholars. It's a text by Benedetto Croce about truth. And it got to, this is during the years of Berlusconi, and his Minister for Culture was interviewed, and it was asked what he thought of the work, because it was a big controversy. And he said, well, he said, 3 days ago, I had an audience with the Pope. I don't remember which one, but the one everybody loved, that Pope. And the Pope, and I asked him about what he thought. And he says, I do not support the work of Kosuth because it relativizes truth. Well, it's been many centuries since artists have been able to piss off the Pope, so I was very honored. But at that time, it was the biggest work in neon I had done. But the letters, Croce's daughters, who were quite old, wrote me a letter thanking me that because of my work, there was a completely renewed interest in the writing of Benedetto Croce, and had a big effect on the family, which was very nice. Not often artists get to help out a philosopher. So what do we have here?
Now we have this.
Oh yeah, the Parliament. Let's go. So this was quite an interesting invitation for a commission. This is the Parliament building in Germany, where all the members of the German Reichstag had their offices. And so I took 2 texts. One was Thomas Mann from The Magic Mountain, where he talks about the origin of life. And then the other is a writer not known outside of Germany named Ricarda Hoch, who was a woman very associated with issues around women's rights, and she also lived in the East. So, I mean, I was, of course, a foreigner to Germany, and here I was doing this enormous work in the floor of the Parliament. So it was a very, a big responsibility, shall we say. It's stainless steel embedded. And if you could walk one way, you read it, and the other, you read it the other way. But the members of the Parliament, they look down on the text, and they can read it both. This is a former brewery that in Germany, and you know you must have a lot of breweries in Germany. And this one they made into a museum. But you only could see the work from the staircase looking down on it. So another big one, big letters.
How big is the letter?
I don't remember. Okay. Vitruvia. This was something, this is, of course, a very, very precious area of Roman antiquity. The work was 30,000 meters. It went throughout the Foro Romano, really only visible by night. It was a paragraph about architecture from one of the most important architectural theoreticians of ancient times. And the Foro Triano, this foro, was built based on his theory. And so basically what I did was fragments of the original foro were poised in relation to fragments of the paragraph.
This is it. This project.
This was the shop that was next to the Sigmund Freud Museum at the time, time of the Nazi period, and it was the last thing before Freud had to flee Austria to London. And this was a project I did about memory. I mean, I can't talk like whatever. This is interesting. This was a show. It turned out that Bolzano, Italy, the very north of Venice, had a whole series of little museums which lined around the town. So they had the idea to give an artist each, one artist to one museum to do something. So I was given the typewriter museum for some reason. And there they have everything from the Turing machine, early computer to, you know. Well, it turns out that the first philosopher to use a typewriter was Friedrich Nietzsche. And this is his typewriter. The building was one of the ugliest buildings I've ever seen. And I said, listen, I'm sorry, I can't marry my work to this building. And so I did billboards in the town to avoid the problem. Henry James was the first writer to use a typewriter, if you're interested. Okay. All right, I was invited to be the centennial artist for the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. It's the famous museum where several important works were stolen. And it's known in America because this is the museum of the stolen work. So this was from a lecture by Whistler about collectors. And I made a work on the wall around the museum. Yes, so he was one of the artists of, Isabella Stewart Gardner was a society lady, wealthy woman, but she was at heart really an artist, but in those years it was difficult for a woman to be an artist and even more difficult for a rich woman to be an artist. So she sent off a man named Bernard Darnson, very important art historian, and he would travel around Europe, take photographs of works for her to buy. This was the first time a collector bought through photographs that we know of. And the whole museum is really put together this way. But then she would take these works and she would do these amazing installations. If you're ever in Boston, you should visit the museum. But she had in her will that if anybody ever changed anything in her installation, the work should be sold and the money given to Harvard. So I had to work with a lawyer about what I could do and what I couldn't do. Well, it was interesting as problems go. So that's one of the works I did. Okay. This is a permanent work I did in Denver, Convention Center. This is a work, permanent work in the what is it? Not really an atrium. It's a kind of area outside that's in the middle of the museum. That's the Galleria Nazionale d'Arte Moderna.
Nice project.
Moving right along. This is in London, a few blocks from where I live now. It's an area called Bermondsey. When I did the work, it's actually, it's the area where Charles Dickens lived in that area, and all of his stories are about that area. And this is a quote from Dickens. And Dickens hated monuments, passionately. And the professor from Oxford, who's the living authority on Dickens, inaugurated it, and he said that, based on his knowledge, this would be one monument that Dickens would love. It's across from Dickens' favorite pub, too, which we also visited at the time. Okay. Oh, this is the Torino, the Castello di Rivoli, a very important museum in Italy. And I did a work, two-part work, one outside and one inside. Is they both there?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the inside. This was an exhibition I did in Paris at my gallery I was working with, and these are the photographs are the libraries of different writers that I value. Yeah. So this was the. Let me read that. The called The Language of Equilibrium. It was from 2007 at the Venice Biennale, and it was on the Isola di San Lazzaro. It's a project in yellow neon and has as its basis language itself. It is a work which is both a reflection on its own construction as well as on the history and culture of its location. This word is comprised of words from the Armenian, Italian, and English language. Language here is used as a signifier of the history of the project of the Nectarian order, which is the order, religious order that controls the island. Yellow with neon is chosen for this work because of the symbolic understanding of yellow at the time of the founding of the monastery as meaning virtue, intellect, esteem, and majesty. That's from Bachler, 1688. The two supportive components of the work, based on the word water, so it's an etymological research really about water, are comprised of words arrived at through a review of their history and use. One aspect of this installation shows this relationship. The other part reflects the role of these words in the Hegesian Paragon, or the Armenian Dictionary of 1749, written by Abbot Mekhitar, the founder of the order. The structure of this installation has two elements, which are integrated on four diverse architectural locations: the bell tower, the northwest wall, the promontory, and the observatory. These four locations reflect both the diversity of the island's architecture as well as they articulate the history and culture of the island. The work reflects the cultural and social history of the evolution of language itself, how the history of a word shows its ties to culture and social realities, quite distinct and disconnected. It is only in the present, when a word is used, as it is with the work of art being experienced, that all that which comprises the present finds its location in the process of making meaning. Here in this work, language becomes both an allegory and an actual result of all which it would want to speak. Okay. Yeah, this a big project I did in Madrid, in which I took fragments of writings by authors who are not Spanish, but write in Spanish. So it's like Borges and artists from the various ex-Spanish colonies. And together, these fragments make a paragraph of mine. Yeah. Yeah, this is a project, I was invited, there's a big art project for every Edinburgh festival. And I was invited this year, a couple festivals ago. And this was an amazing space. I think I had a test. Okay. Come on. Do a better job if I can read it.
Information.
No, document. I didn't talk about poor document.
作品太多了，所以。
What it is, this when young Charles Darwin was a student at Edinburgh University. This is the museum of connected to the university there. And in the lower areas, you find these were taxidermy, stuffed animals, birds, all kinds of animals. And there, Darwin began to work on what became his very well-known theory. So there was a very interesting relationship between Friedrich Nietzsche and Darwin. Darwin never preceded Nietzsche, but Nietzsche was quite critical, fascinated by Darwin, influenced by him, but was extremely critical of him. And because he thought he was kind of a cop-out and a sellout to a certain social order, a certain kind of religious context of proper people, and that he had taken away a lot of the revolutionary aspects of what he was doing. In other words, Darwin was English. So I took, no, it's too late. So these are texts by Nietzsche. Felt that a lot of the things, problems of science, were resolved by art in a very interesting way. And that's probably not put well, but what you find on these drawings, are there more slides? Yeah. In my research, I found that at Cambridge University, they have a lot of the Darwin items in the archive, that he did all these drawings, but there are no knowledge of what they mean. All the Darwin experts just can't quite really understand what they're for. So for me it was wonderful, because by them not knowing what they mean, they could in some sense represent the culture of science. So that's how I used them. Okay. That's the short version. All right, so this was originally an exhibition I did at the Louvre. Let's see the next slide. And what it is that you see that there was a model of the original Louvre Palace, 12th century palace, that the bottom section of it from the 12th century was discovered when they built the pyramid. And so they dug it out and then they kindly gave it to me. And so this was a work that I did. Maybe I read you this because it's kind of good. Neither apparent nor illusion. The first question to Cinto Lagora, an interviewer for the money catalog at the Louvre, was at the beginning. He said, "How and why have you chosen this very special place in the Louvre?" And this was my response. There were several reasons. First, I wanted a place which was, in a sense, generic Louvre. I wanted the sense of history of the place, of art, suggested by the totality of the Louvre. With that providing a kind of tabula rasa upon which I could write. It is the cellar, the underground, and the weight of all that history is pressing down on it. Yet it is an empty space, one which is passed through on the way upstairs to see other concrete and specific fragments of our cultural history. I was the first to ever use it. And when you are in the passage of the medieval walls, you sense that weight of history, almost as history itself, but it's not a specific history as the defined and articulated areas with its objects upstairs. It also seemed appropriate that my work was one with the architecture itself, without the surplus meaning which the art and artifacts above provide. The foundation walls of the original Louvre Palace seemed well to be foundational as a place for me to produce the meaning which I wanted. I also liked that the space as a passage. It's discursive, a location where one walks and talks on your way somewhere else. The box-like arrival location of rooms are often experienced as a series of in-games where you stop, and there the work plays its role as objects of contemplation and thus seem final and totalized. I chose a similar kind of space, a passage from my show at the Hirshhorn Museum some years ago. There's a particular quality to the outside spaces in museum interiors. Etching work seen there as graffiti in relation to the more formal and institutional stasis of the work in the room. Architecture, I repeat myself, of course. Architecture is the most psychological of the arts. It defines the approach to work and frames your response to the kinds of meaning you find in it. These spaces are freer, more open, obviously, and it permits a somewhat different kind of relationship with the work seen there. The area I chose of the Louvre is the psychological interior street of the city of the Louvre. You're not in the house yet, where the world's accumulated history of its culture resides. At this point, you can only anticipate that history. My walls reflect the history of the Louvre itself. All of the rooms upstairs constitute a specific history. Any work made for this location can never be larger than the context it is in. The only way I could confront and address the totality of the Louvre was where I did it. There, on the facade, which wasn't available to me. The work is currently being reinstalled. They're moving it to the hall called the Charles V. It's also 12th century walls. Like the work's original location, this space is part of the medieval palace and features the same characteristics, all the while being a more publicly accessible part of the museum. The new location is within one of the pedestrian sub-passages from the outside street into the center of the Louvre. This will enable the public to access the work more freely and experience it in a more regular capacity, acting as a transitory space between the outside world and the museum itself. Okay. Now it's a bunch of photos. This was a house I did in Shibuya, in the center of Tokyo, for a friend of mine named Johnny Walker, and he is obsessed and just devoted his life to dogs. And so these are all quotes about dogs. Moving along, we're getting a sign. Okay. This is a project that hopefully will happen. It's for the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and there are 4 buildings like this that are like the corners of 4 open books, I guess. Mm-hmm. And so it's a quote. This will be the tallest letters I've used, and it's will be seen all over Paris. They say that for the part of Paris that doesn't see the Eiffel Tower, this will replace that. Big responsibility. But we're raising money, so I don't know. It'll take a while. Is that it? This is Amsterdam project I did for the university. We got to move along because we're running out of time. This is in Switzerland. It's in the same place where the stonework on the floor is. This is for the city of Graz. Okay, this is I did last summer. It's the National Library in Havana. It's a series I did called Grammatical Remarks. This is a very big project I just did in Norway. There are 300 silver mines that were supported the King of Denmark when he controlled Norway. And it was 300 years that this silver paid for his wars in Europe. Anyway, but they're all empty, they're dead. So this work was done in memory of the silver mines, so it's like. And this is the most recent and the last, by the way. This is Scaro Scarpa, who is a local architect in a very revered architect in Venice. And these are drawings by him and quotations of his. And it's in a room that he designed for the university called Kapastele. So. And this is the last thing I did. Just opened 2 weeks ago at Somerset House in London. and it's a show dedicated to Stanley Kubrick, the director. And this text is from the script that he wrote from The Shining, where the famous staircase scene. But this is just a small portion of the work I've done, believe it or not.
And the most important.
And the most important. One day you can actually visit it. We're not sure when that day will come, but we're waiting to find out. I've chosen a text by a modernist who has so accurately expressed the existential plight of being torn between the movement in one's life, beginning from the connection to a home, and the identity of that, and the guilt generated by such a departure, and his own fear of being abandoned by that same choice. I've chosen this text from Running Mother, which constitutes an apparently quiet passage, a reflective moment of contemplation provided by the simple experience of the view where one finds oneself. It is the traveler who stops and reflects, who experiences both where they have come from and where they are going, combined in a moment of contemplation about where they are standing. As is my practice, I formed this work through its relationship to first its architectural site, and then to the social location as well, putting into play a text which reflects on the historical and cultural meaning of that same location, which provides a context for its meaning. You'll have to remember that the author was someone who studied both Camus and Sartre, and the issues of existential issues were very much in his intellectual life, which Taiwan was a great place to be thinking about that. Thank you for your patience.